Welcome everyone. We're going to be starting chapter 20 in this video. So I'm going to head to the PowerPoint and go over the beginning slides up to handout 20A, and we'll complete 20A together. So let's go to our PowerPoint, and chapter 20 is all about the heart. So the heart is a muscle, and that's why I included chapters 10 and chapters 20 together for this test number 3. Now, a couple of things about the heart, just some general statistics here. The heart is going to pump about 1 million gallons of blood per year. So that's incredible when you think about the amount of blood the heart is able to pump in a lifetime. So take your age and multiply it by 1 million, and that's about how much blood your heart's pumped in its lifetime. There are over 60,000 miles of blood vessels that this heart is pumping blood through. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh my God, how could we possibly have 60,000 miles of blood vessels? Our body's not that big. You have to remember that most of these blood vessels are going to be capillaries. And so organs like your lungs, your liver, kidneys are just loaded with capillaries. And they constitute most of that mileage. Now, the heart is located in an area called the mediastinum. And the mediastinum is this area that you see in the picture that is surrounded by a dotted line. Now, the mediastinum is basically, it says it's the area from the sternum, so between the sternum and the vertebrae, and then between the lungs. The heart's located in the mediastinum, but the heart's not the only thing in the mediastinum. We've got parts of your aorta, parts of your vena cava, parts of the esophagus. These other structures are also located in this area known as the mediastinum. Now, when we look at our heart, and something that we'll cover in lab class, the heart is wrapped in a bag. The bag is called the pericardium. And this bag around your heart is made up of 2 layers. It's made up of an outer layer called the fibrous pericardium, which is made up of really tough, dense, irregular connective tissue. And it's going to hold that heart in place. It anchors the heart and it prevents it from overstretching. Inside of that fibrous pericardium is what we call the serous pericardium. And that is a series of 2 thin membranes. It has an outer membrane called the parietal layer, and then it has this inner layer that's right up against the heart tissue called the visceral layer. The gap between the 2 layers is called the pericardial cavity, and it's full of fluid. So if you look below the picture here, it says an inflammation of this pericardium is known as pericarditis. And you don't want to have an infection of these membranes. That is very serious. Also, any bleeding in this bag inside this pericardium leads to a disorder called cardiac tamponade. And cardiac tamponade is where we have fluid on the heart. It could be blood, or it could be other fluid, the pericardial fluid, that starts to put pressure on the heart. And if enough pressure is applied to the heart can't beat anymore, the heart stops. So it says it's potentially lethal because of the pressure it puts on the heart. We've probably all seen one of those medical shows where someone has, a patient comes in and they have cardiac tamponade, and The doctor has to take, really dramatic, take like a syringe and stick it in the person's heart so that it can alleviate all of that fluid and then their heart can beat again. I've seen it on lots of shows. But the pericardium is the bag around the heart. It's a series of membranes, and in between the membranes are fluid. Now, this leads us to the layers of the heart, and we'll learn this in lab as well, but there are 3 layers to the heart itself. The outermost layer is called the epicardium, and it contains the innermost layer of your pericardium. That serous membrane called the visceral pericardium is attached to the epicardium. And then you've got the muscle part of the heart, which is called the myocardium. Remember, I told you myo means muscle. So the myocardium is the muscle of the heart, and it's kind of in the middle. And then on the inside of the heart, we've got all the valves and linings of the chambers. That is known as the endocardium. So you need to make sure that you can recognize the different layers of the heart as well. Now, the heart is a little bit different than your skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle can only contract in one direction. So, for example, like your biceps brachii, the muscle fibers in your biceps brachii can only contract in one direction. The heart is made up of these swirling, interlacing bundles of cardiac muscle. And this allows the heart to compress in more than one direction. So the heart can contract and actually squeeze the blood because of these swirling, interlacing bundles of muscle fibers. This is not how your skeletal muscle is made. Your skeletal muscle is made with just fibers that are arranged in one direction. That's the way they can contract. But the heart is arranged in these swirls of heart fibers that allow the heart to compress itself. So that is one of the differences between skeletal muscle, like biceps brachii, and heart muscle. Okay, so moving on, we've got the anatomy of our heart. Remember that our heart is made up of 4 chambers. You have 2 upper atria, and then you have 2 lower ventricles that make the heart. On the outside of the heart are these sulci, or grooves that contain the coronary blood vessels, and they also have some fat, and they can kind of differentiate the shape of the heart. And so if I scroll down, there's a picture of the heart here on slide 19. These blood vessels are in the grooves, the sulci, and so they allow us to kind of differentiate the 4 chambers. Now, what we're going to have to do is follow blood flow through the heart, and that's where we get to our first handout. So our chambers of the heart are going to be filling with blood and then pushing blood along. And for both lab and lecture, you really need to understand how blood flows through the heart. So I've got a handout, handout 20A, that's going to go over blood flow. And as we go over the blood flow, we're going to learn these chambers of the heart. And so let's examine handout 20A. So I'm going to get rid of myself. Bye. And let's look at this heart. So when we are following blood flow through the heart, it helps us understand how the heart functions. Now, first of all, when you look at this diagram, you have to understand that the heart is looking at you. All right? So the heart is facing you. And I mention this because it flip-flops right and left. So right is left and left is right. So on this diagram, this area here, it's the left side of the diagram, but it's the right side of the heart. This is the right side of the diagram, but it's the left side of the heart because the heart is looking at you, okay? Now, blood flow through the heart is something that I actually don't cover in lecture too much because we go over it in lab. However, I thought I would just draw this out for you on the video because we can kind of go slow and take our time. We don't have enough time to do this in class, so I just say, take this diagram and make it your own, follow blood flow through the heart. But let's do this in our video here. So on the right side of the heart, we have two major blood vessels that bring blood into the heart. So this is the superior vena cava, and I'm just going to abbreviate here. So superior vena cava, and then below it is the inferior vena cava. Now, both the superior and inferior vena cava are going to deliver blood into the right atrium. So this is the right atrium. Now, this is coming from the body. So the reason why I'm using a blue marker is because the blood that's entering the heart into the right atrium is depleted of oxygen. So we commonly denote that with a blue color. Now, it's also important to understand that blood is all red. It's not blue and it's not red. You can't tell deoxygenated blood from oxygenated blood by just looking at the color. It's all red, all right? But blood from our body, and we can even write that, so this is coming from our body, right? The blood from the body is going to come into the right atrium. From the right atrium, the blood is going to go through a valve that we'll talk about here in a few minutes into the right ventricle. And then the right ventricle is going to contract and pump blood through a valve and out of the heart. This big blood vessel that leads out of the heart is called the pulmonary trunk. So I'll just abbreviate it PT, pulmonary trunk. This pulmonary trunk branches. So you have a left branch, and it branches and goes this direction and goes right. Now, these are going to lead to our lungs. So we have the left lung, and then we have the right lung. So blood is going to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle. The right ventricle is going to pump the blood out of the heart to the lungs. So we have the right lung and we have the left lung. Now, blood is going to receive oxygen in the lungs. So the lungs oxygenate the blood, and then the blood returns from the lungs via the pulmonary veins. So because it's oxygenated blood, I'm going to use a red marker, but these vessels that I'm highlighting here are pulmonary veins. Now, these pulmonary veins are going to receive blood from the lungs, both on the right side and on the left side. Now, these pulmonary veins, these pulmonary veins are going to lead the blood to the left side of the heart, into the left atrium. So blood is going to enter the left atrium from both the right side and the left. These are going behind the heart here to the left atrium. Now the left atrium is going to pump blood into the left ventricle. And then the left ventricle is going to pump blood out through a valve into the aorta. And the aorta is then going to branch. The aorta is then going to branch and carry blood throughout the body. See, it's down here to it. What it does is it wraps around, comes down, and goes to the body. All right? So, in a nutshell here, the right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs. The left side of the heart pumps blood from the lungs to the body. So, blood flow through the heart, right atrium to the right ventricle, out the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary arteries. We should mention that because they branch. The pulmonary trunk branches into pulmonary arteries. And then those pulmonary arteries lead to the lungs. The lungs oxygenate the blood, bring the blood back via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium, from the left atrium to the left ventricle, from the left ventricle out into the aorta, and then out to the body, to all the different arterial branches that lead everywhere in the body. So that is our blood flow. So this video kind of introduced us to chapter 20, and we got through handout 20A. So next we'll move on to handout 20B in our next video, and I hope you're having a good day. I'll see you soon.